And while there is definitely some things that don't have a whole hell of a lot of relevance to the real world, and are just ridiculous examples of postmodernist scholarship, and I use that term in air quotes, don't forget that there is actually a lot of really good research that gets done that probably you'll never hear about. I know that for a lot of folks, there is a particular penchant to look at academia and some of the research therein and basically point out how it's meaningless to the real world, how it's not necessarily proper scholarship, or is just plain out not proper scholarship, and what have you. And that is all well and good. But one thing I do want to mention is this is not true of all. And so, in a way, I would resist the temptation to just broad brush paint everything that comes out from journals, from academic institutions, as being awful pieces of garbage. And so, I want to do a little compare and contrast. So Colin Wright recently has been reposting a lot of, shall we say, very stupid articles that indeed have very little to do with actually anything that affects the day-to-day life of a person, anything that actually is terribly meaningful. It's also a lot of postmodernist scholarship that is primarily about activism rather than about the pursuit of the truth, as it were. So I want to show some of those examples that Colin has summarized, and others on Colin's timeline here have summarized. But I also want to show you some of the other things that are much less so, that primarily won't get a whole lot of play because they are not necessarily crazy. Let's put it that way. So, like, this is a good example from one of the folks on Colin's timeline, where the author is talking about, well, I was, writing, I explored the potential emerging from writing with a parasite living on my skin at the time of the writing. My parasite and I respond to the invitation to engage with Sarah Truman's techniques for thinking about research creation and Aaron M. Kunz's concepts of methodological parrhesia. Things like that don't count as scholarship. I don't particularly care if you're writing with a parasite on your skin at the time. That is actually utterly irrelevant. Let's see, a very jargon-heavy paper here. Same author, actually, as before. Quick querying method in post-human educational research, diffractive reading, writing with autistic perception and expression. So jargon-heavy, it has pretty much no meaning to a lot of folks. Let's continue. Go down here. Even more kind of things. A lot of these came up in Colin's timeline. Mermaid becoming mermaid, exploring human and more than human relationality. Yep. Cripistemology of eco-anxiety, which I can't remember what that word means. Hold on a second. No, okay, never mind. I'm not going to bother worrying about that. But it has to do with eco-anxiety, and of course you see all the classic buzzwords that are far more about activism than they are about anything else in here. Failing ethnographies as post-qualitative possibilities, reflections from critical post-humanities and critical disability studies. Both of them are postmodernist things, which means they typically have a very tenuous relationship with reality, as it were, if not being outright hostile to objectivity, as a concept, let alone anything else. Through reference to critical post-humanities and critical disability studies theory, we attend to broken patchwork kintsugi and crypt ethnographies that we argue allow us to sit in the liminal space between qualitative, post-qualitative research and human post-human theory. all of those kinds of things. Another one, dreaming of an abolitionist drama therapy. We conclude that with a call to action to drama therapists to engage in abolitionist practices and their work to be part of the larger visioning process for a more just world. Again, this is not scholarship. This is about activism, as it were, in here with all of these kinds of stupid things. Yeah, another one, Queer Crip Joy, in here. There's been a number of these things that have come up on Colin's timeline of late, which are just like, what the freak? And I think somebody said it in Colin's timeline before, because you have to be honest, the trust in the universities is falling, and I do believe this has a little bit something to do with it, is seeing things like this that are primarily activist literature, not necessarily anything to do with some modicum of reality, as it were. So it's a note that I wanted to make here. But the point I want to make with this is that part of the reason we're seeing this is because it is so ridiculous and commonplace there, and we should see it, but it is not necessarily all things in academia are bad. And so this is this is where I come back to other studies. This is actually, I believe this is psychological science, in here. So this is actually a psychology journal, and there are actually half decent things in here that where is it? I literally opened the page on it. And there are, oh, here we go. Like this one, actually. Taking a disagreeing perspective improves the accuracy of people's quantitative estimates. Many decisions rest on people's ability to make estimates of unknown quantities. In these judgments, the aggregate estimate of a crowd of individuals is often more accurate than most individual estimates. Remarkably, similar principles apply when multiple estimates from the same person are aggregated, and a key challenge is to identify strategies that improve the accuracy of people's aggregate estimates. Here we present the following strategy. Combine people's first estimate with their second estimate made from the perspective of someone they often disagree with. In 5 pre-registered experiments with populations of the United States and the United Kingdom, we found that such a strategy produced accurate estimates compared with situations in which people made a second guess or made second estimates, or when second estimates were made from the perspective of someone they often agree with. These results suggest that disagreement, often highlighted for its negative impact, is a powerful tool in producing accurate judgments. Interesting things like that. As you get, for those of you who haven't been around on these things before, a lot of journals are moving toward offering options for open access, which is to say you don't have to pay anything yourself if you're from the general public to see this article. Restricted access means it's behind a paywall usually, and sometimes where you'd have to go, this is a sneaky way that you can do it, but if you're on the guest Wi-Fi of a university, oftentimes you can take advantage of the university's license to get access to some of these kinds of articles. Corey Clark is a familiar name here. One of her articles, I don't doubt. With Ileana. Nice. Here's another one. Very, very relevant, actually, now when we're talking about, AI and the images generated by AI. AI hyperrealism, why AI faces are perceived as more real than human ones. Recent evidence shows that AI-generated faces are now indistinguishable from human faces. However, algorithms are trained disproportionately on white faces, and thus white AI faces may appear especially realistic. Okay, so that's kind of partially having things freaked out there. And it's just going to depend on how many photos the thing is trained on. But anyway, a little bit different there, but not quite as crazy as it could be. Let's put it that way. So there's examples of good things in here. And other things here. Obviously, we know from some of the other things that a bunch of the social sciences do have an unfortunate ideological bias involved right now, and I'm sure others can speak to that even more so than I can. But, of course, that's social sciences as an example. You could also get into physics. This is Physical Review Letters, and you're going to see a whole bunch of things that no guarantee that I am necessarily going to be able to even understand a whole bunch of this stuff is related to physics and quantum mechanics. Here, condensed matter and materials. Let's see, due to tensile qualities, you know, lots of interesting things. Stress and geonomic singularities. I mean, this has a lot more to do with how we navigate the world, and some of the stuff may actually seem entirely unrelated at first, but you never know, because a lot of those physical experiments and things that we had to do in physics and chemistry and engineering during World War II became some of the technologies and things that we do take advantage of today, like radar for weather forecasting, for example. Many other particular things also followed. So, you know what? I wouldn't necessarily knock this. Physics of fluids and climate in here, condensed matter and materials. Yep. All sorts of actually really interesting things in here, though I don't necessarily understand all of the terminology because I am not a physicist per se, but focus a lot more in weather and climate than anything else. Likewise, I mean, you can also find things in chemistry that are nowhere near the particular kind of crazy stuff that you see from things like the postmodernist journals. Of course, it's always bears in mind to just watch out for some of the postmodernist crap that gets into some of the STEM journals, as that has happened. But you're also still seeing good work here that probably is going to eventually inform something in the real world that is going to be important, even if you have never any idea exactly what. Something that is more tangible, though, because we have to deal with it all the time, is things like weather forecasting. And so one of the things that's popular right now in the weather forecasting world is figuring out how machine learning, aka AI techniques, can be used to improve weather forecasts for things like tropical storms, severe weather, all the rest, as an option. And that is actually quite directly related because, I mean, we're talking about protecting life and property, right? So, those kinds of things are important. And you can get in here even more with a whole bunch of the weather and climate journals to see even more good related stuff. And likewise, you can get even into even more. This is from different engineering journals. This is Transportation Research Record is what it is. So you're talking about bridge, impact of different vehicles on bridges and improving those kinds of things here. Improvements of bridge development, because Lord only knows you don't want a bridge to collapse when you're falling over it, so you might as well study what works and what doesn't in terms of the eventual strain on the bridge. So that is just what I wanted to mention here, is that, yes, I've done it myself. Gina and I have done it together. Many of us have done it to point out articles that are absolutely ridiculous. And while there are definitely some things that don't have a whole hell of a lot of relevance to the real world and are just ridiculous examples of postmodernist scholarship, and I use that term in air quotes, don't forget that there is actually a lot of really good research that gets done that probably you'll never hear about, that has a lot more impact in the long term on things that do go on in the day-to-day life and the creation of new technologies and things like that will ultimately be extremely helpful. So let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and all that good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious.